The sound of dirt hitting the last pine box echoed through Rose Richmond's ears long after the gravedigger had finished his work, and she stood alone in the cemetery on the outskirts of Goldfield, Nevada, watching the sun bleed red across the western sky while her entire world lay buried beneath 6 feet of desert earth. 4 graves in a row, fresh turned soil marking where her mother, father, and 2 younger brothers had been laid to rest within the span of 10 days, the fever sweeping through their modest home with a cruelty that left her standing as the sole survivor at 21 years old. The wind picked up, carrying dust devils across the sage-dotted landscape, and Rose pulled her black shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of isolation settle into her bones like winter frost. She had no aunts or uncles, no cousins waiting in distant towns, no grandparents still drawing breath on this earth. Her father had been an only child who married an orphan, and together they had built their small ranch on hope and determination, until the scarlet fever came through Goldfield in the spring of 1885, leaving death in its wake. Rose had nursed them all, wiping fevered brows and spooning broth between cracked lips, watching helplessly as one by one they slipped away despite her desperate prayers and tireless efforts. She had been spared, though sometimes in the dark hours before dawn she wondered if surviving was truly a mercy, when it meant facing the crushing loneliness that now defined her existence. The walk back to the ranch house took her past the main street of Goldfield, where the evening crowds were beginning to gather outside the saloons and gambling halls. The town had exploded in recent years with the silver strikes, transforming from a dusty outpost into a bustling hub of miners, merchants, and opportunists seeking their fortunes in the unforgiving Nevada desert. Rose kept her eyes down, unwilling to meet the curious or pitying gazes of townsfolk who knew her story. She had already endured enough sympathetic words and empty platitudes to last a lifetime. The ranch sat 3 miles outside town, a humble collection of buildings that included the main house, a barn, a chicken coop, and corrals that her father had built with his own hands. 20 head of cattle grazed on the scrubland, along with 2 horses and a handful of chickens that still needed tending. Rose stood in the doorway of the silent house, unable to cross the threshold into rooms that still smelled like sickness and loss. Her mother's apron hung on its hook. Her father's pipe rested on the mantel. Her brother's wooden toys lay scattered near the hearth, exactly where they had left them before the fever struck. She turned away, walking instead to the barn where she could lose herself in the familiar rhythms of evening chores. The horses nickered softly as she entered, and she found comfort in their warm presence, in the simple act of measuring out grain and filling water buckets. Physical work had always been her refuge, a way to quiet the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her when she stayed still too long. She was forking hay into the stalls when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Rose tensed, setting down the pitchfork and moving to the barn door. A lone rider was coming up the path, silhouetted against the last rays of sunset. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle that hung near the door, a necessary precaution for anyone living alone in this wild country. The rider drew closer, and Rose could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a dust-covered coat, a dark hat pulled low over his face. He raised one hand in a gesture of peace as he approached, and something in the easy grace of his movements made Rose lower the rifle slightly, though she kept it within reach. He stopped his horse a respectful distance from the barn and dismounted, moving slowly and deliberately to show he meant no threat. When he finally looked up, Rose found herself staring into a weathered face that spoke of long years spent under the western sun. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sharp blue eyes that held both intelligence and kindness. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried easily across the space between them. "Name is Owen Xavier. I heard in town about your loss, and I wanted to offer my condolences and my services if you need them." Rose regarded him warily, her grief making her suspicious of strangers bearing offers of help. "What kind of services?" Owen gestured toward the ranch around them. "Place like this needs tending, especially with spring moving into summer. Cattle need watching, fences need mending, hay needs cutting. I am a cowboy by trade, been working ranches since I was tall enough to sit a horse. I am not looking for charity, miss. I will work for fair wages, and I will sleep in the barn or the bunkhouse, wherever you see fit. But I figure you could use an honest hand, and I could use honest work." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the very real problem she faced. He was right that she could not manage the ranch alone, not with the summer work coming on. She had perhaps enough money to pay a hired hand for a few months if she was careful, and the alternative was selling everything her parents had built and starting over with nothing in a town full of strangers. "Why would you want to work here?" she asked. "There are bigger spreads around, places that could pay you more." Owen shrugged, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Bigger is not always better. I have worked those big operations, hundreds of head of cattle, dozens of hands, foremen who treat you like you are as expendable as horseshoes. I would rather work a small place where the work matters, where I can see what I am building. And truth be told, Miss Richmond, I lost my own family when I was not much younger than you. My parents and sister to cholera, 7 years back. I know what it is to stand alone, and I figure if I can help someone else not feel quite so alone in their grief, well, that is worth more than extra wages." Something in his words, in the quiet sincerity of his tone, loosened the knot of suspicion in Rose's chest. She saw recognition in his eyes, the understanding of someone who had walked a similar path through loss and come out the other side. It did not erase her caution entirely, but it shifted something, opened a door she had not realized she had closed. "Room and board plus $30 a month," she said finally. "You can take the bunkhouse. There is a stove in there and basic furniture. You work dawn to dusk, same as I do. I will not abide drinking or gambling or bringing trouble to this place. Are those terms acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Owen said, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "You will not regret this, Miss Richmond. I give you my word." She nodded shortly, not trusting herself to say more. "Put your horse in the far stall. There is grain in the bin and hay in the loft. I will bring some supplies to the bunkhouse after I finish here." Owen tipped his hat to her and led his horse into the barn, moving with the confident ease of a man who knew his way around livestock. Rose watched him for a moment, then returned to her chores, acutely aware of another person sharing the space that had been hers alone. It felt strange and somewhat frightening, but also, she had to admit, less lonely. That night, Rose lay in her childhood bed and listened to the familiar creaks and settling sounds of the house. Somewhere across the yard, Owen Xavier was bedding down in the bunkhouse, a stranger who had ridden into her life with an offer of help and a story of loss that mirrored her own. She did not know if trusting him had been wise or foolish, but the decision was made now, and she would face whatever came with the same stubborn determination that had carried her through the last terrible weeks. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fever dreams and memories, but when the first light of dawn crept through her window, Rose rose and dressed and walked out into a morning that felt slightly less empty than the one before. Owen was already awake, standing near the corral with a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. He turned when he heard her approach and offered a simple nod of greeting. "Morning, Miss Richmond. I made coffee if you want some. Hope you do not mind that I helped myself to the makings." "That is fine," Rose said, accepting the cup he poured for her from a battered pot. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed to face the day ahead. "I thought we would start by checking the herd, seeing what condition they are in. Then we need to inspect the fence lines on the eastern pasture. My father mentioned some posts were rotting before he took sick." Owen listened attentively, his eyes focused on her face as she spoke. There was something reassuring about his presence, the way he gave her his full attention without interrupting or trying to take charge. Many men would have assumed they knew better, would have dismissed her plans in favor of their own, but Owen simply nodded and said, "Sounds like a good plan. I will saddle the horses while you have your breakfast." They worked through the morning in a companionable rhythm that surprised Rose with its ease. Owen proved to be exactly what he had claimed, a skilled cowboy who knew his work and did it well. He had a gentle hand with the horses and a keen eye for the cattle, pointing out which animals looked healthy and which might need watching. When they reached the eastern fence line, he assessed the damage with practiced efficiency and immediately began calculating what materials they would need for repairs. "I can ride into town this afternoon and pick up the lumber and wire," he offered, "unless you need me here for something else." Rose shook her head. "No, that makes sense. Take the wagon and my father's list with the lumber supplier. He had credit there that should still be good." The afternoon found Rose alone again, working in the vegetable garden her mother had planted behind the house. The rows of beans and squash and tomatoes needed weeding and watering, tasks that kept her hands busy even as her mind wandered through corridors of memory. She was elbow-deep in dirt when she heard the wagon returning, the creak of wheels and the steady clopping of hooves announcing Owen's arrival. He unloaded the lumber with efficient movements, stacking it near the barn where it would stay dry. Rose walked over to inspect his purchases, nodding approval at his choices. He had bought exactly what was needed, nothing more or less, and had even secured a better price than she expected. "The supplier said to tell you he was sorry for your loss," Owen said quietly. "Seems like your father was well respected in town." "He was a good man," Rose said, her throat suddenly tight. "They all were. My mother, my brothers. They deserved better than to die from some fever that swept through with no warning and no mercy." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, "There is no deserving when it comes to death. It takes who it wants without regard for good or bad, deserving or undeserving. That is what makes it so hard to bear. But the love you had for them, the love they had for you that does not die, that stays even when everything else is gone." Rose looked at him, this stranger who spoke with such understanding, and felt something crack open in her chest. "How did you go on?" she asked. "After you lost your family, how did you keep living when everything that mattered was gone?" He met her eyes steadily. "I found new things to matter. Not to replace what I lost, nothing could do that, but to give me reason to wake up each morning. Work helped. Moving helped. And eventually, though I never thought it possible at first, there were moments of joy again. Small ones at first, just a sunset or a good meal or a horse running free. But they built on each other, those moments, until life felt like something worth living again instead of just an endurance test." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words like water into parched ground. "I do not feel like there will ever be joy again." "I know," Owen said gently. "I felt that way too, but you are stronger than you know, Miss Richmond. You have already survived the worst of it. The rest is just learning how to live again, and that comes one day at a time." They stood together in the fading light, two people bound by shared grief and the tentative beginnings of something that might become friendship if given time to grow. Rose felt the slightest easing of the weight she carried, as though Owen's presence and understanding had shouldered a small portion of her burden. The days that followed settled into a pattern that brought structure back to Rose's life. She and Owen worked side by side from dawn to dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, maintaining the buildings and equipment that kept the ranch running. Owen proved to be not just skilled but thoughtful, often anticipating what needed doing before Rose had to ask. He fixed the chicken coop door that had been sticking for months, repaired the loose shingles on the barn roof, and oiled every hinge and gate until they swung smooth and silent. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch after supper, too tired for much conversation but finding comfort in shared silence. Owen would whittle small figures from scraps of wood while Rose mended clothes or worked on needlepoint, her mother's old sampler spread across her lap. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories from their pasts or observations about the day's work, but just as often they simply existed in each other's presence, finding peace in not being alone. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Rose woke in the middle of the night to the sound of raised voices coming from the direction of the road. She grabbed her robe and rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. She could make out shapes moving near the barn, and her heart seized with fear. Claim jumpers and thieves were common enough in this country, and a woman alone on a ranch was seen as easy pickings. She was reaching for her father's rifle when she saw Owen emerge from the bunkhouse, moving with swift purpose toward the intruders. Rose did not think, just ran downstairs and out into the night, arriving in time to hear Owen's firm voice carrying across the yard. "This is private property, gentlemen, and you are trespassing. I suggest you mount up and ride on before this becomes a problem." There were 3 of them, rough-looking men who reeked of whiskey even from a distance. The largest one, a brute with a scarred face, laughed mockingly. "Private property belonging to some dead rancher and his little girl. We figured she would be grateful for some company out here all alone." "She is not alone," Owen said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "And you are leaving, now." The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Rose stepped forward, raising the rifle so moonlight gleamed along its barrel. "You heard him. Get off my land." Seeing 2 armed defenders where they expected a helpless woman changed the calculation. The men muttered among themselves, then slowly backed toward their horses. "This is not worth the trouble," one of them said. "Come on, let us try the Clayton place." They rode off into the darkness, and Rose did not lower the rifle until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Only then did she realize she was shaking, adrenaline coursing through her veins like wildfire. Owen turned to her, concern etched across his features. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for standing up to them, for being here." He stepped closer, and in the pale moonlight she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I meant what I said that first night. I would not let harm come to you or this place." "You have my word on that, Rose." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "I believe you," she said softly. "Owen." They stood there in the darkness, something shifting between them. Some invisible line being crossed from employer and employee toward something deeper and more complicated. Rose felt it like a physical thing, a pull toward this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and offered not just help but understanding and protection and companionship. "We should get some sleep," Owen said finally, though he made no move to leave. "Sun will be up in a few hours." Rose nodded but found herself reluctant to go back inside to leave this moment and whatever it might mean. "Owen, I am glad you came here. I want you to know that." His smile was visible even in the darkness. "I am glad I came too, Rose, gladder than I can properly say." They parted then, each returning to their separate beds, but Rose lay awake until dawn thinking about the way her name had sounded in his voice, the way her heart had raced when he stepped close, the realization that grief was not the only emotion stirring in her chest anymore. Summer settled over the Nevada desert with its characteristic intensity, turning the landscape into shimmering waves of heat that rose from the baked earth. Rose and Owen adjusted their schedule, working in the early morning hours and late evening when the temperature was bearable, resting through the worst heat of midday. They had fallen into an easy partnership, finishing each other's sentences and moving around each other with the unconscious choreography of people who knew each other well. One sweltering afternoon, Rose was in the kitchen trying to preserve berries she had picked before they spoiled in the heat. The air was thick and stifling despite the open windows, and sweat dripped down her back as she stirred the boiling pot. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear Owen approach until he spoke from the doorway. "You are going to cook yourself along with those berries if you are not careful." She looked up, pushing damp hair from her forehead. "They need to be put up today or they will go bad. I will not waste food, not when winter is coming and supplies might run short." Owen stepped into the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. "Let me help then. 2 people will make the work go faster, and then we can both escape this heat." They worked together in the cramped kitchen, falling into an efficient rhythm. Owen proved surprisingly adept at domestic tasks, carefully filling jars while Rose sealed them with wax. Their hands brushed occasionally as they moved around the small space, and each touch sent small sparks of awareness through Rose's body. "Where did you learn to preserve berries?" she asked, trying to focus on anything other than his proximity. "My mother taught me before she passed. She said a man should know how to take care of himself, how to cook and clean and mend. Said it would make me a better partner someday." He paused, then added quietly, "I think she knew she was not going to be around to take care of me forever, even before the cholera came. She wanted to make sure I could survive without her." Rose's heart ached for the boy he had been, learning these skills while unknowingly preparing for devastating loss. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. Strong too, like you. She kept our family going through drought and hardship, never complaining, never giving up." "You remind me of her sometimes, the way you face things head on instead of turning away." The compliment warmed Rose more than the summer heat. "I do not always feel strong. Sometimes I feel like I am held together with nothing but stubbornness and spite." Owen laughed, a rich sound that filled the kitchen. "Well, stubbornness and spite have carried many people through hard times. No shame in that." When the last jar was sealed, they carried the precious stores down to the cool cellar, where shelves that had been full when Rose's mother tended them now stood mostly empty. Seeing those bare shelves drove home again how alone she was, how much she had lost. Owen must have seen something in her face because he touched her arm gently. "You are doing well, Rose. Your parents would be proud of how you are keeping this place going." She turned to him in the dim cellar light, and suddenly they were very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Her breath caught as he lifted one hand and carefully tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Rose," he said, her name almost a question. She did not know who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. Rose responded without thinking, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as she kissed him back. It was sweet and tender and nothing like the rough advances she had fended off from cowboys in town. This was different, special, a meeting of two souls who had found each other in the wilderness of grief. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face. "I have wanted to do that for weeks now. But I did not want to presume, did not want to take advantage when you are grieving." "You are not taking advantage," Rose whispered. "You are giving me something to live for besides just survival. You make me feel alive again, Owen, like there might be happiness in my future after all." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Rose felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. She had been so alone, so lost in her grief, that she had not realized how much she craved this connection, this tenderness, this promise of something beyond endless lonely days. They emerged from the cellar hand in hand, blinking in the bright sunlight like people waking from a long sleep. Everything looked the same as it had an hour before, but Rose felt fundamentally changed, as though she had crossed some invisible threshold into a new phase of her life. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Owen squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Now we keep doing what we have been doing, working the ranch, taking care of each other, building something good out of all this hardship. If you are willing, Rose, I would like to court you properly. I know the timing is not ideal. I know you are still mourning, but I also know that life is short and precious, and when you find something worth holding on to, you do not let it slip away." "I would like that," Rose said, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. "I would like that very much." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Rose had imagined for herself. There were no formal dances or chaperoned outings, no parlor visits or flower deliveries. Instead, their romance unfolded in the everyday rhythms of ranch life, in shared glances across the dinner table and stolen kisses in the barn, in the way Owen always saved her the best piece of meat, and how Rose mended his shirts with careful stitches, in quiet conversations under the stars where they shared their dreams and fears and hopes for the future. August brought the county fair to Goldfield, and Owen convinced Rose to take a day away from the ranch to attend. She was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with the idea of socializing when she was still wearing mourning black, but Owen argued gently that her parents would want her to live, to find moments of joy and normalcy. They drove into town in the wagon, joining the stream of families and couples heading toward the fairgrounds. Rose felt self-conscious in her somber dress among the brightly colored fabrics around her, but Owen stayed close by her side, his presence a steadying anchor. The fair was a riot of sights and sounds, from the livestock pens where farmers showed off their prize animals to the food stalls selling roasted corn and sweet pies. Children ran past with ribbons and candy, their laughter ringing through the air. Rose felt simultaneously part of it and separate from it, as though she was watching life happen from behind a pane of glass. Owen bought her lemonade and they wandered through the exhibits, stopping to admire a particularly fine horse in the show ring. "That is good stock," Owen observed. "We should think about breeding your horses next spring, building up the herd." The casual way he said, "We" made Rose's heart skip. He was thinking of the future, of next spring and beyond, of a life built together. "I would like that," she said. "My father always meant to expand the horse operation but never had the capital." "We will find a way," Owen said confidently. "This place has good bones, Rose. With work and time, it could be something really special." They were watching a pie-eating contest when Rose heard her name called. She turned to find Martha Greenwood, one of her mother's friends, approaching with concern written across her kind face. "Rose, dear, I have been meaning to come visit but did not want to intrude on your grief. How are you managing out there all alone? "I am managing well, Mrs. Greenwood." "This is Owen Xavier. He has been helping with the ranch work." Martha's eyes sharpened with interest as she assessed Owen, clearly trying to determine the exact nature of their relationship. Owen tipped his hat politely. "Madam." "I see," Martha said, though her tone suggested she saw perhaps more than Rose had revealed. "Well, I am glad Rose has some help. That place is too much for one person to handle alone. You must come to church this Sunday, both of you. We miss seeing you, dear." After Martha moved on, Rose felt a flutter of anxiety. "People will talk, seeing us together. They will make assumptions." "Let them," Owen said easily. "We know the truth of things, and that is what matters. But Rose, I want to be clear about my intentions. I am not interested in being just your hired hand. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I know it is too soon to speak of marriage. I know you need time, but I want you to know where my heart stands." Rose looked up at him, this good man who had appeared in her darkest hour and shown her that light still existed in the world. "My heart stands with yours," she said softly. "I think it has almost from the beginning, though I was too lost in grief to recognize it." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the fair, and Rose found herself actually enjoying moments of it, laughing at the antics of a juggler and marveling at a woman who could shoot targets while standing on a galloping horse. By the time they headed back to the ranch, she felt more alive than she had since before the fever struck. September brought cooler temperatures and the beginning of fall work. Rose and Owen spent long days cutting and storing hay for winter, their bodies moving in synchronized rhythm as they worked side by side. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, and each night they fell into bed knowing they had accomplished something meaningful. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, Owen reached for Rose's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about this place. I have some money saved, not a lot but enough to buy into partnership if you would be willing. Make it official that I have a stake here, that I am not just working for wages but building something of my own." Rose considered his words carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A legal partnership. We would own the ranch together, share the profits and the work equally. And when you are ready, when enough time has passed, maybe that partnership could become something more. A marriage." Her breath caught. They had danced around the topic but never addressed it so directly. "You want to marry me, more than anything," Owen said, turning to face her fully. "I love you, Rose. I think I started loving you that first morning when I watched you face the day with your head held high despite everything you had lost. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I would be honored to spend my life by your side." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks, but for the first time in months they were tears of joy rather than grief. "I love you too. I did not think I would ever feel this way again, did not think my heart had room for anything but sorrow. But you have given me hope, Owen. You have given me a reason to dream about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Rose felt the last remnants of her isolation shatter. She was not alone anymore. She had found family in this cowboy who understood her pain and loved her anyway, who worked beside her and dreamed with her and made her believe in the possibility of happiness again. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to the partnership. Yes to the marriage when the time is right. Yes to building a life together. Yes to all of it." Owen pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms as darkness fell across the desert. The ranch that had felt like a monument to loss now felt like the foundation of something new, a future built on love and shared purpose. They married in December, a small ceremony in the Goldfield church with Martha Greenwood and the pastor's wife serving as witnesses. Rose wore her mother's best dress. altered to fit her slender frame, and carried wildflowers that Owen had ridden 2 hours to find in a protected valley. It was simple and unpretentious, exactly what they both wanted. Standing before the pastor, promising to love and honor each other through all the days ahead, Rose felt her parents' presence like a blessing. They would have liked Owen, she thought. They would have approved of his integrity and kindness, would have been grateful that she had found someone to share the burden and the joy of the life they had started. When Owen slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Rose felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. This was where she was meant to be, who she was meant to be with. The grief would always be part of her, a permanent scar on her heart, but it no longer defined her entire existence. She was Rose Xavier now, a rancher's wife, a woman building a future instead of mourning the past. The wedding night was spent in the ranch house, which now belonged to both of them. Owen carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in the bedroom, and Rose felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" Owen asked, cupping her face in his hands. "We can wait if you need more time." Rose shook her head. "I do not want to wait. I want to start our life together tonight in every way." He kissed her softly, then with increasing passion as their hands explored each other with tender curiosity. There was fumbling and nervousness, moments of laughter and whispered reassurances, but also profound tenderness and a sense of rightness. They came together as two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side, and when they finally lay tangled in each other's arms, Rose felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. "I love you, Mrs. Xavier," Owen murmured against her hair. "I love you too," Rose whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The first year of their marriage unfolded with both challenges and triumphs. They worked dawn to dusk building up the ranch, adding to the cattle herd and starting the horse breeding program Owen had envisioned. Money was tight, requiring careful management and occasional sacrifices, but they faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthening with every problem solved. Spring brought the first foal from their breeding program, a long-legged colt with a sweet disposition and excellent conformation. Owen declared it the finest horse he had ever seen, and Rose teased him about his biased opinion, but secretly she agreed. The colt represented their future, proof that they were building something lasting. In May, Rose realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain, then shared the news with Owen one evening as they worked in the barn. "I think I am with child." He dropped the bridle he was mending and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Truly, Rose, that is wonderful news. How are you feeling? Are you well? Should you be doing this work?" She laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine, just a little tired. And yes, I can still work. Women have been having babies and working ranches for as long as there have been ranches. I am not fragile." But Owen insisted on taking over the heavier tasks, refusing to let her lift anything he deemed too strenuous. Rose found his protectiveness both endearing and occasionally exasperating, but she could not truly be annoyed when it came from such obvious love and concern. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. Rose's body changed, her belly swelling with new life, and she felt a complex mix of joy and grief. Her mother should have been there to guide her, to share wisdom and excitement. Owen sensed her melancholy and tried to fill the gaps, reading every book about childbirth he could find in town, asking Martha Greenwood endless questions, until the older woman took pity on them both and agreed to attend the birth. In late January of 1887, on a night when snow fell softly over the desert, Rose went into labor. Owen paced the kitchen while Martha attended Rose in the bedroom, occasionally calling out encouragement or updates that did little to ease his worry. The labor was long and difficult, testing Rose's strength and endurance, but as dawn broke, she delivered a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair. Owen burst into the room the moment Martha allowed it, his face transformed with awe as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Rose, you are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." They named him James after Rose's father, and from the moment Owen held his son in his arms, Rose knew their family was complete. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but a new beginning, a future built on love and hope. The years that followed were full of the ordinary miracles of family life. James grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk on sturdy legs and speak in sentences that delighted his parents. The ranch prospered, their herd growing, their reputation for quality horses spreading throughout the territory. They hired additional help during busy seasons but remained a small operation, exactly what they wanted. When James was 3, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Owen's mother. Maggie came into the world with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin, and she wrapped both parents around her tiny finger from day one. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, who had his mother's dark hair and his father's easy smile. The house that had stood so empty and silent after the fever now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Rose often paused in her work to simply watch her children play, overcome with gratitude for the unexpected blessings her life had brought. The pain of losing her first family never fully disappeared, but it had transformed into something softer, a bittersweet ache rather than the sharp agony of fresh grief. One evening in the spring of 1893, Rose and Owen sat on the porch while their children played in the yard. James, now 6, was showing his younger siblings how to skip stones in the water trough, his serious expression a perfect mirror of his grandfather's. Maggie shrieked with delight when she managed to make her stone bounce once, while Thomas simply threw his into the water and laughed at the splash. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Rose asked softly. "If the fever had not come, if we had never met?" Owen considered the question carefully, as he always did. "Sometimes. But I cannot regret the path that brought us together, even though it was paved with terrible loss. Does that make me a bad person?" "No," Rose said, taking his hand. "It makes you human. We cannot change the past, can only build on it. And what we have built, Owen, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. A family, a home, a life full of love. My parents would be happy knowing that their ranch is thriving, that their daughter found happiness. That is not betraying their memory. It is honoring it." James ran up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can we go check on the new foals tomorrow, please?" "We can," Owen agreed, ruffling his son's hair, "if you finish your chores and mind your mother." "I will, I promise." James ran back to his siblings, already telling them about the anticipated adventure. Rose watched her children with a full heart. This was what surviving meant, she realized. Not just enduring the pain, but transforming it into something beautiful and life-affirming. She had been the last of her family after fever took them, alone and lost in an empty house. But Owen had become the family she needed, and together they had created something precious and enduring. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rose leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt profoundly grateful. For second chances and new beginnings. For the cowboy who had ridden into her life when she needed him most. For the family they had built from the ashes of grief. For every ordinary, extraordinary moment that made up their shared life. "I love you," she said simply. I love you too, Owen replied, his arm tightening around her. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. Their children's laughter floated through the evening air, a promise that the future held more joy than sorrow, more light than darkness. And as the Xavier family settled in for the night, the ranch that had witnessed such tragedy stood as testimony to the resilience of the human heart and the healing power of love. The years continued to roll forward like the seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and rewards. The ranch grew into one of the most respected operations in the region, known for quality livestock and fair dealing. James grew tall and serious, taking on more responsibility as he entered his teenage years. Maggie proved to have a gift for working with horses that rivaled her father's, while Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers that suggested he might be the one to handle the business side of the operation. Rose found herself slipping naturally into the role of matriarch, not just of her own family, but of their growing circle. She took in young cowboys who needed a place to stay, offered advice to other ranchers' wives, and became known throughout Goldfield as someone who understood grief and survival and the importance of community. The girl who had stood alone in the cemetery had become a woman who ensured no one in her orbit had to face hardship without support. In the summer of 1898, Rose and Owen celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together friends and neighbors from across the county. Tables groaned under the weight of food, children ran wild in the meadow, and as the sun set, someone brought out a fiddle and there was dancing under the stars. Owen swept Rose into his arms for a waltz, and they moved across the makeshift dance floor with the ease of long practice. "Happy anniversary, my love," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," Rose replied, her hand resting over his heart. "Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for becoming my family." "You are my everything," Owen said simply. "You and the children, you are the best parts of my life, Rose. I would go through everything again if it meant ending up here with you." She kissed him there in front of everyone, not caring who saw, wanting the world to know how much she loved this man. When they finally broke apart, their children were watching with expressions ranging from delight to embarrassment. Maggie clapped enthusiastically while James tried to pretend he had not seen anything, and Thomas made exaggerated gagging sounds. The party continued late into the night, full of music and laughter and the warmth of people who genuinely cared for each other. As Rose looked around at the gathering, at the life she and Owen had built together, she felt her parents' presence like a blessing. They would have loved this, she thought. They would have been so proud. When the last guests had departed and the children were finally asleep, Rose and Owen stood together in the quiet ranch yard. The moon hung full and bright overhead, silvering the landscape in shades of black and white. "Do you remember that first night?" Rose asked. "When you rode up to the barn and offered to work for me? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even with grief written all over your face. I remember wanting to take away your pain to give you reasons to smile again. You did that," Rose said softly. "You gave me back my life, Owen. You showed me that surviving was not the same as living, and you taught me how to do both." He pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms under the desert stars. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer, a horse nickered from the barn. The sounds of the ranch they had built together, the life they had created from loss and love. "Come to bed," Owen said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day." They walked into the house hand in hand, past the photographs that lined the mantel showing their growing children and prospering ranch. Rose paused at one picture, an old photograph of her parents and brothers that she had saved from before the fever. She touched it gently, a nightly ritual she had maintained for years. "Sleep well," she whispered to those long-gone faces. "We are doing well, we are happy, and I will never forget you." Owen waited patiently, understanding as always. When Rose turned back to him, he smiled and led her up the stairs to their bedroom, to the life they continued to build together one day at a time. The story of Rose and Owen Xavier became something of a legend in Goldfield, told as an example of how love could grow from the darkest circumstances. They proved that family was not just about blood, but about the people who stood beside you through hardship and celebrated with you through joy. The ranch they built together thrived for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a lasting legacy of two people who found each other when they needed it most. But that was still far in the future. For now, in the spring of their lives together, Rose and Owen simply lived each day with gratitude and love, raising their children and tending their land and cherishing the ordinary miracles of their shared existence. She had been the last of her family after fever took them, standing alone in a cemetery with nothing but grief for company. And the cowboy had become the family she needed, giving her not just help with the ranch but a reason to live again, a future to dream about, and a love that healed the wounds loss had carved into her heart. They had weathered storms and drought, illness and hardship, but through it all they had each other. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As Rose drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Owen's arms, she thought about the strange paths life took. How tragedy could lead to unexpected blessings. How the worst moments could eventually give way to the best ones. How family could be lost and found and rebuilt in ways you never anticipated. She had survived the unsurvivable, and not just survived but thrived. She had loved and been loved, had created new life and built something lasting. Her parents would be proud, she thought. They would be so proud. And with that comforting thought, surrounded by the sounds of her sleeping family and the steady heartbeat of the man she loved, Rose surrendered to sleep, grateful beyond words for the life she had been given, for the family she had found, for the love that had saved her when she thought salvation was impossible. The ranch slept peacefully under the Nevada stars, a testament to resilience and love, to the power of two broken people who had helped each other heal, to the family that had grown from the ashes of grief. And in the morning, as the sun rose over the desert, they would wake and begin again together, exactly as they always had and always would, building their life one precious day at a time.